Hey everyone, my name is Sarah and I am with Chesapeake Parks Recreation and Tourism, and today we are going to be creating a terrarium. And hopefully most of what we'll be putting in this terrarium you can find around your house, but you may be able to order some of these supplies online if you are like me and practicing social distancing right now. So a few things that you will need to create your terrarium. You'll need a glass jar with a tight fitting lid. So this is actually a pickle jar that I have cleaned out and removed the label from. You will need some kind of soil, so whether that's potting soil or you can dig up some dirt in your backyard and place it in the freezer for a couple days to kill any bugs that might be living in that soil. If you have it already, activated charcoal is great, but it's not necessary. And also some kind of rock or pebble. So these are just little river rocks that I have, sort of an assortment. You might have some of these already at your house or in your garden. You can use the pretty colorful ones if you'd like, or stick with the standard typical colored rocks that you would find. And you can also use some sand if you have it. If you don't have access to rocks, then the sand will work as well. You'll need a couple of instruments to be able to get those plants into the terrarium. So some things that I've used are a butter knife. You can use chopsticks if you have them. And if you don't, you could also use little skewers like you would for shish kebabs when you're grilling. And of course, you're going to need to have some plants. So we're going to get started building our terrariums, and we're going to go on a little hunt around the house looking for some plants that we can place inside. Now, just a little friendly reminder that it is not okay to harvest plants from your local parks. So please only do this with the plants that you may find in your backyard, or you may have success finding a lot of these online as well. Now, to start with, you're going to open up your jar and you will want to place some rocks in the bottom of the jar. You can fill it up about a quarter, a fifth of the way from the bottom. You might want to tilt your jar to the side instead of dumping the rocks in, just to avoid the glass breaking. And I started with using some large rocks first, and then I filled in with some much smaller little pebbles. Once you have the rocks placed, you'll grab your soil, and I happen to have some activated charcoal, so I'm going to mix just about a tablespoonful's worth in with the soil. Make sure that's mixed up pretty well, and then you can put the soil in. So you probably want your rock and soil mixture to be about a third of the way up your jar, and it sort of depends on the height of your jar as well. I used a butter knife to kind of pack the soil down a little bit. If you wanted to, you can also put something like a paper towel in between the rocks and the soil to keep the soil from falling into the rocks. The next step is to find some plants. I happen to have a great patch of moss growing on the north side of our house. Moss tends to grow really well on the north side because it needs moist conditions to grow, and the north side stays shaded during the part of the day when the sun is strongest and sort of drying everything out. So you may find some moss on the north side of your house as well. So I found this little patch and I just kind of dug up a little bit of this moss and then continued looking for plants. This is a little planter garden that I have, so I'm going to just take a quick little snip of this. We'll see if it grows. And again, this is kind of like a type of cactus that I have growing outside. So we're going to take a little snip of that one as well. You can use air plants, African violets, experiment with the different plants that you have growing in and around your house. Now, once you have your plants collected, you can see I've filled up my jar a little bit, about halfway with the rocks and the soil. I'd maybe put a little bit less than that in there. Make sure you pick out any bugs or critters that you might find in your plants. I found this little worm. So I'm just going to place the moss directly on top of the soil in the jar. And you can see the little cactus that I had already has some root suckers. So that I'm going to plant directly into the terrarium, and I'm just going to use a chopstick to actually push those roots down into the soil. This other plant that I clipped does not have any root suckers, so I'm going to see if I can get some to grow just by placing it in a little bit of water. and seeing if any roots start to pop up over the next week. You can always open your terrarium back up and add it in if so. If any of your plants die in your terrarium, feel free to trade them out with something else. See how it works. Then what I'm going to do when I'm happy with the plants is just put some more rocks in, just as a sort of visual. I've got some pretty colorful bright blue rocks and some river stones, so it'll just help to keep the terrarium looking exciting and vibrant with those plants in there. And then you're going to want to give your terrarium a really good misting. I recommend using a squirt bottle as opposed to just pouring water in with the hose or under the faucet. You want to really soak it pretty well in there. Once you put the lid on, the hope is that the terrarium will be self-sufficient on its own. So then once it's pretty wet, you're going to screw the lid on quite tightly. And you can see the water condensation on the sides. Don't forget you can decorate your lid with fabric scraps or even paint. And then you're going to want to place your terrarium in an area of your house that gets sunlight but not direct sunlight. So mine's just on a shelf. You'll want to check your terrarium over the next couple weeks to see if condensation continues on the side. The terrarium should be self-sufficient, so as long as you're seeing condensation, you don't have to take the lid off, you don't have to add any water, and it should survive for years to come. Enjoy!